The night was suffocating. Thick smoke curled into the sky, black and angry. Flames crackled, licking the night air, devouring everything in their path. The street was a mess of flashing red and blue. Sirens screamed, drowning out the murmurs of the growing crowd. A fireman stumbled out, his face pale, his hands trembling. He carried something. One. The figure was limp. Woman. Her face was smudged with soot, her hair matted. But it wasn't the fire that killed her. Her neck told another story. Dark purplish marks. A cruel grip etched into her skin. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The woman's belly was swollen, heavily pregnant. The fire hadn't touched her. But she had been silenced before the flames could scream her pain. Detective Maeve Winters arrived, her coat trailing behind her. The air reeked of ash and something acrid. It clawed at her throat, sharp and bitter. She stepped over the damp earth, her boots squelching. The house stood like a charred skeleton, its windows hollowed out. A neighbor approached, shaking, her words tumbling out. She was alone. Her husband's car wasn't there. Maeve's eyes flicked to the driveway. Clean. Me. Her chest tightened. Find him, she ordered, her voice low but firm. The living room was a wasteland of charred furniture and scorched walls. Yet something felt untouched. On the mantelpiece, above the wreckage, a photograph remained. The woman. The husband. Smiling. Maeve picked it up, the edges hot against her fingers. A crack in the glass split their faces apart. Behind her the team found something else. Diary. The cover was half-burnt, the edges curled like dead leaves. Maeve opened it, the faint smell of smoke wafting out. The last entry stopped her cold. I'm scared of him, it read. He watches me when I sleep. I can feel his hatred. He wants us gone. Maeve closed the diary, her heart pounding. The husband wasn't just missing. He was running. Maeve's breath hitched. The diary slipped from her gloved hands, landing softly on the ash-strewn floor. Get an APB out on the husband, she barked, her voice sharp. Her team scrambled, their radios crackling to life. But something pulled at her, a nagging thread she couldn't ignore. The fire wasn't random.
It was meant to bury something. She scanned the room again, her eyes narrowing. The blackened walls, the melted clock, the overturned couch. And then she saw it, in the corner, beneath a pile of smoldering debris. A faint shimmer. Maeve crouched down, brushing away the ashes with care. A bracelet emerged. Delicate, silver, still intact. Her stomach churned. It was tiny, too small for the victim. Her hand froze as a memory surfaced. A report. Weeks ago. A missing girl. 6 years old. The victim's niece. Maeve's radio crackled. Detective Winters, we've located the husband's car, came the voice. Her grip tightened on the bracelet. Where? Edge of Cedar Lake. Abandoned. No sign of him. Her jaw clenched. Cedar Lake. A secluded spot. A place to hide. Or to end things. Send a unit, she ordered. And search the shoreline. She stood, the bracelet heavy in her palm. The fire wasn't just a cover-up. It was a warning. A message, loud and clear. Whoever did this wasn't done yet. Maeve turned to the team. Focus on the husband's financials. Where he's been spending. What he's been hiding. The diary. The bracelet. The fire. They were puzzle pieces, but the picture wasn't clear. Not yet. A shout echoed from the hallway. Detective! Over here! Maeve rushed toward the voice. In a back room, untouched by flames, they found it. A crib. Pristine, untouched, a cruel contrast to the ruin outside. Inside the crib, a doll lay propped up, its eyes staring blankly, its dress splattered with something dark. Not soot. Blood. Maeve's stomach twisted. The air in the room felt colder, heavier. She stepped closer to the crib, her hand hovering over the doll. It was delicate porcelain, with a cracked face and one missing eye. The blood on its dress was fresh, vibrant against the white lace. "Bag it," she ordered, her voice steady despite the unease crawling up her spine. An officer carefully lifted the doll, revealing something underneath. A folded piece of CCC. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice firm. No response. Only the wind, whispering through the branches. One of the officers took a step forward. "Could be an animal," he whispered. Maeve didn't reply. Her instincts told her otherwise. She motioned for them to fan out, her heart hammering in her chest. The crunch came again, louder this time, from deeper in the woods. Maeve advanced cautiously, her boots sinking into the soft earth. A faint glow caught her attention, something metallic reflecting the moonlight. She crouched, brushing aside the leaves and debris. A child's locket. It was open, revealing 2 tiny photos inside. One of the victim, smiling brightly. The other, the missing niece. Maeve swallowed hard, closing her fist around the locket. A sudden scream tore through the air. High-pitched, terrified. It was a child. Maeve broke into a run, the officers on her heels. The scream echoed again, closer this time. It led them to a shallow ravine, its edges jagged and crumbling. At the bottom, barely visible in the dim light, was a figure. Small, shivering, clutching her knees. The niece. Maeve slid down the incline without hesitation, her flashlight bobbing wildly. "Hey, it's okay," she called out, her voice soft now but urgent. The child looked up, her face streaked with tears and dirt. Her lips quivered, but she couldn't speak. Maeve reached her, crouching low, her hands steady. "It's all right. You're safe now." But as she reached out, the child flinched, pointing behind Maeve. Her voice came in a broken whisper. "He's still here." Maeve froze. A twig snapped behind her.
And then the unmistakable sound of heavy breathing. Maeve didn't turn immediately. Her grip tightened on the flashlight, her other hand instinctively moving to her holster. The child's wide eyes were locked on something over Maeve's shoulder. "Stay still," Maeve whispered, her voice barely audible. The breathing grew louder, ragged and uneven, like an animal stalking its prey. Slowly, Maeve pivoted, her flashlight slicing through the darkness. The beam landed on him. The husband. His face was gaunt, his eyes wild and bloodshot. Ash streaked his skin, and his hands twitched at his sides. In one of them, a knife gleamed. Maeve straightened, her hand steady on her gun. "Drop it," she commanded, her voice calm but firm. He didn't move. A slow, eerie smile crept across his face. "She doesn't belong to you," he rasped. His voice was low, like gravel scraping against metal. Maeve took a step forward, keeping herself between him and the girl. "Put the knife down," she repeated, her tone colder now. His head tilted, almost childlike in its curiosity. "You don't understand," he muttered. "She's mine. She was always meant to be mine." Maeve's blood ran cold. She tightened her stance, her eyes never leaving his. "She's not yours. She's a child, and she's coming with me." The husband's smile vanished. His grip on the knife tightened, his knuckles whitening. "No," he hissed. "You can't take her. Not after everything I've done." Maeve could see the madness in his eyes, a storm brewing, ready to erupt. She glanced at the girl. Her tiny frame was shaking, her lips trembling as she clutched her knees. Maeve knew she had to act fast. "Listen to me," Maeve said, her voice softening just enough. "You don't want to hurt her. You've already done enough." For a moment, his expression faltered. A flicker of something human. Regret. Pain. But then it was gone. He lunged. Maeve moved faster, her gun already drawn. A deafening crack split the air. The husband stumbled, his knife clattering to the ground. He fell to his knees, clutching his shoulder where the bullet had struck. Maeve stepped forward, her gun still trained on him. "Stay down," she ordered. Behind her, the girl whimpered, tears streaming down her face. Officers rushed in, their lights flooding the ravine. They cuffed the husband, his body limp, his head hanging low. Maeve turned, kneeling beside the girl. "You're okay," she whispered. The child threw herself into Maeve's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. As Maeve held her close, the weight of the night settled in. The fire, the murder, the madness, and the fragile life she'd managed to save. The forest was silent again, save for the soft cries of the child in Maeve's arms. The glow of the officers' flashlights painted shifting patterns on the trees, a stark contrast to the darkness that seemed to cling to the ravine. Maeve cradled the girl, murmuring soothing words, though her own heart was pounding. The husband was being restrained, his face twisted in pain and defiance. "You don't understand," he shouted, his voice hoarse, echoing in the night. "She's my family. She belongs with me." Maeve's jaw tightened, her hand instinctively tightening around the girl's small frame. She felt the child flinch at the man's words, her sobs growing louder. "You lost the right to call her that the moment you hurt them," Maeve said coldly, locking eyes with him. He snarled, struggling against the cuffs. "The fire wasn't supposed to kill her," he spat. "I just wanted to scare her. But she wouldn't listen. She was trying to take everything from me." Maeve's stomach churned, bile rising in her throat. The full weight of his delusion was clear now. This wasn't just a crime of passion. It was the unraveling of a man who had crossed the line into darkness long ago. "Get him out of here," Maeve ordered, her voice sharp. 2 officers hoisted him to his feet and dragged him away, his curses fading into the distance. Maeve turned back to the girl, brushing the soot and dirt from her face. "It's over," she whispered, though she knew that wasn't entirely true. For the girl, the scars of this night would linger. But she was alive, and that mattered more than anything else. Maeve stood, carrying the child in her arms as she climbed out of the ravine. At the top, paramedics were waiting, their faces a mix of relief and urgency. Maeve handed the girl over carefully, watching as they wrapped her in a blanket. The child clung to her hand for a moment, her tiny fingers trembling. "Don't leave," she whispered. Maeve knelt again, meeting her eyes. "I'll be right here," she promised. As the ambulance doors closed and the flashing lights disappeared into the distance, Maeve stood in the clearing, the locket still in her pocket. The night air was heavy with the smell of smoke and earth. And though the fire was out, the embers of the case still burned brightly in her mind. This wasn't just about the crime. It was about what was left behind. Broken lives, fragile hope, and unanswered questions. And for Maeve, it was far from over. The dawn broke with a muted gray light, softening the sharp edges of the wreckage. The scorched remains of the house stood as a silent monument to the night's horror. Maeve sat on the hood of her car, the chill of the early morning air biting through her coat. The child had been taken to the hospital, her tiny frame fragile but alive. For now, she was safe, cradled in the care of professionals who could begin to piece her shattered world back together. Maeve stared at the locket in her hand, the photos inside now seared into her memory. The mother's radiant smile, the child's innocent gaze. 2 lives forever altered by one man's descent into madness. Her radio crackled, breaking the stillness. "Detective Winters, the husband is in custody. Doctors are treating his injuries, but he's refusing to talk." Maeve sighed, her breath visible in the cold air. "He'll talk eventually," she replied. "And when he does, we'll make sure every piece of his story is exposed." She clipped the radio back to her belt and leaned back, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The weight of the night pressed heavily on her. The fire was extinguished, the child found, the suspect caught. but closure felt elusive. A shadow moved in her peripheral vision.
It was the neighbor, the one who had called in the fire. Her face was pale, her hands wringing nervously. "I just wanted to thank you," the woman said, her voice trembling. "For saving her?" Maeve nodded, though the gratitude felt hollow. "It's not over yet," Maeve said. "But we'll do everything we can to make sure she's okay." The neighbor hesitated, then handed Maeve something, a small stuffed bear, slightly singed at the edges. "She used to play with this in the yard," the woman murmured. "Maybe it'll help her feel safe again." Maeve took the bear, her throat tightening. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. As the neighbor walked away, Maeve placed the bear on the seat beside her. She knew this wasn't the kind of case that faded quickly. It would stay with her, etched into the quiet moments of her life. But as the first rays of sunlight touched the ruins, she allowed herself a single thought. The child had survived. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.